Special Agent Lundy knew Dexter was a serial killer. He knew Dexter kept his boat at the same dock as the Bay Harbor Butcher, was aware that Dexter had tampered with a blood report on a criminal murdered by the Butcher, and never believed Dokes was the real killer. Throughout the entire season, it seems he knew more than he let on, which once again begs the question, did Lundy know Dexter was a serial killer? Given his reputation for being the best FBI detective in America, it seemed unlikely that a killer operating right under his nose would have gone unnoticed. In this video, I'm going to prove to you that Special Agent Lundy knew Dexter was a serial killer and explain how love, politics, the Trinity Killer, and his own beliefs kept him from acting on it. But first, we must properly understand Frank Lundy and the Bay Harbor Butcher case. Frank Lundy makes his debut in Season 2, Episode 2, when the FBI brings him in to lead Miami Metro's biggest case, the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. With 18 victims, it was one of the most high-profile cases the city has ever seen, yet no one at Miami Metro suspected Dexter. Even before he appears on screen, Lundy is established as one of the best in his field, and someone Dexter should be worried about.
Any idea who the FBI is sending?
Some guy named Lundy.
Frank Lundy? He's a rock star. The Green River Killer, the DC sniper. If the case was impossible, he broke it.
From the start, we see him as a real threat, cracking what many saw as another impossible case. We're really shown this in his first press conference.
First report from the field had these parts as coming from one body.
Actually, it's two. Uh-oh.
Lundy is then assigned to assemble a task force for this case, handpicking only those he believed were best for the job. Dokes, a well-known figure at Miami Metro, approached Lundy after the conference, eager to join the task force. However, Lundy dismissed him without hesitation.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
But I don't think you'd be a good fit for my team.
I thought you just said I was qualified.
I said you'd done some fine work in homicide. Frankly, Sergeant, you're more of a leader than a team member. I'm not convinced you play well with others.
On the other hand, Lundy was adamant about Deborah joining the team, despite her reluctance due to low confidence after the ice truck killer ordeal.
You want me to find a serial killer? I was engaged to one, for Christ's sake. What kind of cop? What kind of...
That's why I chose you, you know.
Lundy's approach to both Dokes and Deborah highlights his bold, strategic, and often ruthless leadership. He dismisses Dokes without hesitation, shutting him down directly, while pushing Deborah just as firmly, but for the opposite reason. Now, you may be wondering how this is relevant, but this detail in his character is crucial to understanding whether Lundy knew the truth, so be sure to keep watching. The first interaction between Lundy and Dexter comes an episode later in An Inconvenient Lie, when Dexter steps into the field morgue surrounded by evidence of his own crimes. He gazes at them with nostalgia, reflecting on his work. Then, unexpectedly, Lundy appears, engaging him in a conversation about the case.
Some twisted set of principles.
They would have to be twisted, wouldn't they?
The worst killers in history are usually the ones who think the murders were somehow just.
He doesn't ask Dexter about forensic analysis. Instead, he discusses the psychology of the killer. Lundy speculates that the Bay Harbor Butcher operates by a twisted set of principles, eerily close to Dexter's own code. This exchange shows us how quickly Lundy gets inside the mind of the Bay Harbor Butcher, inside of Dexter's mind. Dexter justifies his killing with Harry's code, a lot. But that's not the only reason why this interaction is significant. As a renowned profiler, he also has the advantage of observing Dexter's unfiltered reaction to the killings in real time. It's hard to believe that someone as perceptive as Lundy wouldn't have noticed the nostalgia in Dexter's eyes and behavior, the subtle signs of a killer looking over his own work. This may not seem significant on its own, but when we consider the other points, then you'll see why the argument for Lundy knowing is so strong. They continue talking, and Dexter plays along, stating that there's never a justification for killing, but Lundy corrects him.
But there's never any justification for killing.
No. Well, one, of course. To save an innocent life.
This could explain why Lundy never exposed Dexter if he suspected the truth. Lundy believes killing is only justified when it protects the innocent, and in his own way, Dexter does just that, eliminating killers and inadvertently saving lives. As the Bay Harbor Butcher case gained traction, a key forensic discovery put Dexter at risk. Marine biologists discovered traces of a rare algae on the rocks used to weigh down the bodies, an algae that only grows in specific areas of Miami. This narrows down the investigation to a few potential dumping sites, including Coral Cove Marina, where Dexter docked his slice of life. Realizing the danger, Dexter sabotaged the morgue's cold storage, causing the bodies to decompose beyond analysis, but his relief was short-lived.
Anyway, Good thing the heat didn't affect the rocks. Lundy had us store them separately.
The rocks?
Yeah, the algae we found in the rocks.
I have no idea how Dexter got away with lying for so long. I mean, he was so bad at it, to be honest. Eventually, though, they narrowed down their search to Coral Cove Marina, where Dexter keeps his boat, putting him under scrutiny as he matches one of the key factors in the Bay Harbor Butcher's profile. Up until this point, Lundy was still in the early stages of his investigation and had no clear suspect. However, once he discovered that Dexter has a boat at Coral Cove Marina, his interactions with him change ever so slightly. While Lundy doesn't outright treat Dexter as a suspect, there's a subtle shift in his demeanor, almost as if he's weary of him but remains professional out of courtesy. We see this play out soon after in the Dex Takes a Holiday, when Miami Metro receives a call from someone claiming to have been attacked by the Bay Harbor Butcher. Lundy is adamant about bringing Dexter along with him, suggesting an underlying suspicion or a desire to keep a close eye on him.
Rumor has it you have a knack for tracking serial killers.
I hear the same about you.
By this point, I'm sure Lundy has developed his own suspicions, so his words to Dexter are deliberate. He subtly tests him, recognizing that Dexter's knack for catching killers mirrors that of the Butcher. His remarks carry a dual meaning, hinting at suspicion while carefully observing Dexter's reactions. At the crime scene, he probes further, his investigative instincts telling him there's more to Dexter than that meets the eye.
If you were the Bay Harbor Butcher, would you use a place like this?
Actually, yes. Location-wise, it's not a bad choice. It's quiet, remote.
In another one of those questions that carries a veiled motive, Lundy is testing Dexter again. Throughout this tense scene, you can see Lundy analyzing him, comparing Dexter's demeanor to the profile of the Butcher he has in his head. This isn't definitive proof that he knows, but his suspicion is crucial to the entire theory, so stay with me. Also, if you're enjoying the video at this point, please subscribe. The following episode of Dexter submits a fake 32-page manifesto to the Miami Tribune in an attempt to slow down the investigation. It has the desired effect, and the department scrambles, with each member forming their own theories. But Lundy quickly realizes what's really happening.
He knows how we work. Look how he hits every major theme. Political, environmental, religious. He manages to weave together Julius Caesar, Berlin, Germany, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Gandhi. It's scattershot. He knew that this would send us scurrying like squirrels for nuts.
Yeah, but to suggest that he might be one of us, how can you be sure?
Lundy, always methodical and sharp, immediately recognizes the implications of the situation. It all points to someone with a law enforcement background. Acting on this suspicion, he orders the team to start investigating each other, a directive that unsettles everyone. The idea that one of their own could be the killer is difficult to accept, but Lundy knows it's a possibility they can't ignore. Determined to uncover the truth, he personally interviews members of Miami Metro, scrutinizing their backgrounds, behaviors, and potential connections to the case. When he calls Dexter into his office to discuss Anthony Rodrigo, one of the Butcher's victims, he wastes no time with formalities.
So, the Rodrigo case. Let's talk about that one.
Okay.
Kind of blew it, didn't you?
Lundy, well aware of Dexter's reputation as Miami Metro's top blood spatter analyst, is immediately unsettled when he discovers glaring errors in Dexter's blood work on the Rodrigo case, mistakes too obvious for someone of his skill. These small missteps allowed a killer to walk free. Lundy isn't just questioning the technical flaws, he's probing deeper, searching for their greater implications. Every word is calculated, every pause a test. He watches Dexter closely, waiting for hesitation, a slip, but Dexter stays composed. Yet Lundy's suspicion lingers, reinforcing that he sees Dexter as more than just another investigator. Deborah and Batista soon begin investigating Anthony Rodrigo's case, and their efforts take an unexpected turn when they uncover a crucial piece of evidence linking the Bay Harbor Butcher to Miami Metro itself. Assigned by Lundy to revisit the site, Deb and Batista track down Lenny Asher, a paranoid neighbor who obsessively documented everything he saw. Though eccentric, Lenny provides them with old notes from the night Rodrigo disappeared, including a crucial detail, a license plate number. Running the plate, they discovered that the car was registered to a drug dealer, Charlie Lewis. But there's a problem. Lewis had been arrested 4 days before Rodrigo vanished, and his vehicle was seized by Miami Metro. This means only law enforcement had access to that car that transported Rodrigo to his death.
The only people allowed access to those vehicles are members of the Miami Metro Police Department. Holy shit.
Bay Harbor Butcher is one of our own.
The revelation is chilling, and it's massive for two main reasons. First, the discovery confirms that the Bay Harbor Butcher is someone within law enforcement, intensifying the pressure on Dexter as the news tightens around Miami Metro. The idea that the killer has insider knowledge is no longer speculation, it's fact. This revelation means the FBI will scrutinize every officer, detective, and forensic analyst, leaving Dexter with fewer places to hide. More critically, it marks the first tangible, albeit circumstantial, link between Dexter and the Butcher. Until now, his sloppy blood work on the Rodrigo case, while suspicious, could be dismissed as human error. But with new evidence proving that Rodrigo was abducted using a Miami Metro seized vehicle, Dexter's forensic mistake is no longer just a blunder, it's a direct connection to the Butcher's actions. The implication is damaging. His supposed error allowed someone within Miami Metro to capture and kill Rodrigo, and with Dexter being the one responsible for the faulty analysis, it casts a dark shadow over him. If Lundy was truly the top-tier detective the show portrayed him as, then combined with Dexter's odd behavior, he likely would have made the connection by this point, or at the very least begun to suspect who Dexter really was. Anyways, his growing suspicions had begun to contrast sharply with his deepening relationship with Deb. Their connection, built on mutual respect and long nights spent working the case, had gradually turned romantic. Deb found herself drawn to his stability, a rare change from the chaos of her past relationships, while Lundy had come to appreciate her raw honesty. I believe this relationship, much like with Quinn, clouded his vision and judgment when it came to seeing who Dexter truly was, and we'll talk about that later, because Sergeant Dokes changed everything. After investigators discover a collection of blood slides hidden in Dexter's car at the airport, the FBI and Lundy officially designate him as the prime suspect in the Bay Harbor Butcher case. When the FBI brings Dexter in for questioning, he briefly panics, fearing they've uncovered his secret, but he quickly realizes they're focused entirely on Dokes.
I know this will come as a shock to you, Morgan, but our primary suspect is someone you know well.
Convinced they've unmasked the killer, they build their case around mounting circumstantial evidence. His history of violent outbursts, his sudden disappearance, and now the blood slides. To the FBI, this is irrefutable proof. With Dokes seemingly on the run and the evidence tying him directly to the murders, the case appeared closed. Dexter, seeing an unexpected way out, plays along.
I always sensed there was something off about him.
Whilst it's perfect for Dexter, Miami Metro is thrown into turmoil. While some are satisfied with the airtight case, others are not so sure. LaGuerta, having worked closely with Dokes for years, refuses to accept his guilt. She fights relentlessly to clear Dokes, proving he was on stakeouts during some murders, making it impossible for him to be the Butcher. But her evidence is dismissed due to her past relationship with him, rendering it inadmissible. Lundy refuses to reconsider, especially since Dokes had called her for help and she failed to act, further damaging her credibility. Lundy, though sympathetic, offers little more than a listening ear.
What really pisses me off is you might be right, but in trying to protect your friend, you blew the best shot we had at bringing him in from the cold.
This is massive because despite the overwhelming evidence against James Dokes, Frank Lundy was not entirely convinced that the case was as open and shut as it appeared. Unlike the rest of the FBI, which was eager to close the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, Lundy remained cautious, aware that something about Dokes' alleged guilt didn't sit right. When Maria LaGuerta approached him with concerns about Dokes' innocence again, he listened. She pointed out the inconsistencies in the timeline, arguing that Dokes couldn't have been responsible for some of the Butcher's kills, and informed him that an analyst in Port-au-Prince, Lyons, was willing to examine the blood slides. Rather than dismiss her outright, Lundy entertained the possibility, at least in private, that they might be wrong.
No, but it's worth looking into, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Yes. Okay.
For starters, why don't you brief me on both those missions?
His razor-sharp instincts had led him to major breakthroughs throughout his career, so the fact that he wasn't fully convinced Dokes was the Bay Harbor Butcher was significant. Despite the overwhelming evidence, something still didn't sit right with him, and the only real alternative to Dokes was Dexter. However, Lundy's skepticism wasn't enough to change the course of the investigation. With bureaucratic Deputy Director Max Adams eager to close the case, Lundy was sidelined. Ironically, no one knew Dokes was still alive, trapped in a cage by Dexter. This is why his death ultimately sealed the case, bringing the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation to a close. With Dokes' body found in the Everglades, burned beyond recognition in an explosion, the FBI considered the case solved. His death, coupled with Dexter's frame job, cemented his legacy as the Butcher in the eyes of law enforcement and the public. Miami Metro, despite some lingering doubts among certain members, moved forward, unwilling or unable to challenge the unofficial narrative. Meanwhile, those closest to the case felt the fallout. LaGuerta refused to accept Dokes' guilt, setting herself on a path that would ultimately lead to her downfall. Deb, despite her initial doubts, had no choice but to accept the FBI's conclusion, and Lundy, though highly intelligent, moved on from Miami with a rare blemish on his otherwise stellar record. He may have caught the butcher, but the truth remained buried beneath layers of deception. So, did Lundy know Dexter was the Bay Harbor butcher? I believe the answer is yes. Lundy had too many clues to ignore. He knew Dexter kept his boat at the Coral Cove Marina, a location tied to the Bay Harbor butcher. He saw Dexter, one of Miami Metro's best forensic experts, botch blood work that led to a killer's release, only for that killer to be killed by the butcher. And most importantly, although he said the overwhelming evidence pointed towards Dokes, he never explicitly said it was Dokes. And I think that's because he didn't believe it was Dokes. If Lundy didn't buy the Dokes narrative, the only real alternative was Dexter, given the circumstances of the cases. With his track record of catching killers like the Green River Killer and the DC Sniper, I find it hard to imagine he wouldn't have put these pieces together surrounding Dexter. I mean, Lundy identified Trinity with a single conversation, so I find it hard to believe that during his entire time in Miami in Season 2, he wouldn't have identified Dexter. So if he knew, why he do nothing about it? Well, there are a lot of factors to consider. One possibility is that Lundy silently approved. In their first interaction, he stated that the only justification for murder is saving an innocent life. If he suspected Dexter, he may have viewed him as a necessary force, eliminating killers and indirectly saving lives. Another possibility is that Lundy lacked concrete proof and wasn't willing to risk his career or his relationship with Deborah on a hunch. With nearly 30 years in the FBI, he was too smart to make baseless accusations, especially against someone Deb cared about. As a top investigator, he relied on evidence, not instinct, and accusing Dexter without proof could have cost him everything. Another possibility, often discussed, is that Lundy wanted Dexter's help in catching the Trinity killer. With over 279 victims, Trinity was one of the most prolific killers Lundy had ever pursued, and he may have seen Dexter as a valuable asset in bringing him down.
Really is kismet, you know?
Kismet?
Fate. I mean, if Trinity had struck in Buffalo instead of Miami, I wouldn't have access to a blood guy of your caliber.
It's another instance where Lundy says one thing but implies something deeper. Here, it feels like he's subtly asking Dexter to help him track and kill Trinity. If Lundy truly suspected Dexter, wouldn't he have done something? His obsession with catching serial killers never wavered, even in retirement. Just because he once justified murder in extreme cases doesn't mean that he would have condoned Dexter's code. Perhaps he saw Dexter as just another killer, but without solid evidence, he had no choice but to let it go. I think that if he hadn't been killed by Christine Hill in Season 4, Episode 4, I believe he would have eventually caught Dexter. But I guess we'll never know. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video about Detective Quinn knowing Dexter's secret. Trust me, I'm almost 100% sure he knew.